advisor to the government of Jersey for 11 years, and I was examining precisely this. From 1987 to 1998, I was the principal economic advisor to Jersey. And my instruction was to keep a balanced and diversified economy. That was my job description, nothing else. But it was impossible, because Jersey was emerging, and had been emerging since the late 1960s, as a major tax haven. And by the 1980s, when I came in to office, Jersey was already suffering from the Jersey disease. It didn't play itself out through real exchange, through nominal exchange rates, because Jersey is actually part of the sterling area. Go to Jersey, its pound is in parity with the pound over here. It played itself out through what are called real exchange rates and inflationary pressures, to the point where the cost of living in Jersey is about the highest in the world. House prices in Jersey are much, much higher than they are in London. And for ordinary Jersey people, this is a catastrophe. But it also means that it's virtually impossible to invest in any industry outside banking, because the profitability of those industries is simply too low. And I'll show you what happened to Jersey over the last 30 years to demonstrate that in just a few seconds. The same thing is instability and volatility within the financial services world, weak governance, rent-seeking behaviour, over-dependence upon a single industry. And look what happens on the outcome: slower and narrower economic growth, crowding out. This should be familiar to all of you living in London. Exactly the same has happened in South East England. Crowding out of other economic activities because of the high cost of living, the development of an enclave economy with low job creation. For all the talk about the importance of the finance industry, it doesn't actually create that many new jobs. It hasn't. And it won't. The loss of entrepreneurialism. They call themselves entrepreneurial, but by and large they are actually rent-seeking in their attitude. They are not people who develop new businesses. The financialisation of the economy, the increasingly authoritarian approach, and those of you who've read that chapter in Treasure Island, when Nick and I went to Jersey, it was extraordinary. Nick had been working in Angola during the Civil War for quite a long time. That's how I first knew Nick and met him, was when he was in Angola. And he said, the atmosphere of repression was extraordinary. Wherever he went, he was followed by state agents. I took him to Jersey in March 2009, and after 24 hours, he said, "John, do you know we're being followed?" I said, "No, you're deluding," but actually we were being followed. He pointed out several people, and it turns out that we were being followed by Jersey police. And it's pathetic, isn't it? And journalists, friends of mine, American journalists in particular, who've tried to visit Jersey, amongst other things, to cover the Putney scandal, which has been a festering scandal on that island for years, found exactly the same. This American journalist was simply banned from going to Jersey. So increasingly authoritarian governments, state capture, party politics being captured by special interests, funded by special interests. If this rings bells, in fact, look at the funding of New Labour, look at the funding of the Liberal Democratic Party, look at the funding of the Conservative Party, you'll see extraordinary volumes of funding coming from offshore tax havens. Rising poverty and inequality. Richard, you must come to Jersey one of these days. You'll have such fun, because you'll meet some people who exemplify exactly what you're talking about. And let me just hang up. You mentioned Veblen. Now, Veblen's an economist. I've always paid a lot of attention to his work. Is I think really important, particularly on conspicuous consumption. Jersey is a tiny little island, 9 miles by 5. Go there, count the Ferraris, count the Porsches, count the Rolls Royces. This is conspicuous consumption par excellence. You can't drive anywhere faster than 40 miles an hour. So these things are all about demonstrating your status in society. Jersey is a very, very interesting test bed of your idea. And the levels of inequality in Jersey are in your face. And I directed 3 household expenditure surveys in the island, and I was stunned to find that 35% of households in Jersey in the 1980s fell below what was then the poverty line. So this is one of the richest places in the world. If you look at Jersey's GDP per capita, it ranks 3rd in the world after Luxembourg and Liechtenstein. And by the way, if you want to look at GDP per capita, the CIA do some very interesting work in this area. If you look at the top 20 jurisdictions in the world in terms of GDP per capita, you will find that 17 out of those top 20 are tax havens. So the development strategy of choice must be for us all to become tax havens, because that's the way to success, clearly. So remarkable parallels between the finance curse and the resource curse, and that's the basis of our paper. Can I have the next slide, please? Just to quickly return to talking about Jersey. This is Jersey in the 1970s. Jersey in 2011. The important thing is to look at the size of the purple mass, the financial services. In the early 1970s, it was about 10% of the economy. The tax haven role had already begun to establish itself. There was already an offshore financial centre in St Helier. But look at its size now, 43% of the economy. We talk in Britain where official statistics say that financial services account for, including insurance and business services, account for about 11% of nominal GDP. We talk about it being oversized, and the IMF says that Britain has an excessive finance sector. Look at Jersey and the size of its finance sector, and you'll see that it is completely captured by this. It is completely dependent upon this. And the danger of this lies in the fact that because it's so dependent, the island's government has no power whatsoever to resist the pressure from banks and accounting firms and law firms who come and say, we want you to deregulate, we want you to de-tax, we want you to lower tax rates on capital and shift it across to labour. We have exactly the same, what's called arbitrage, happening here in Britain. Time and time again, if you listen to the Today programme, between those toxic 16:15 to 16:25, you know what? 6:15 to 6:25, when they're talking business, and the BBC hands itself over to the business community. That's the time and time again you'll hear business representatives and business lobbies saying, we need to deregulate to remain competitive. We need to have lower taxes to remain competitive. Exactly the same applies in Jersey. Can I have the next slide, please? There's nothing new about the finance curse, or the ideas underlying it. James Tobin was talking about this way back in the early 1980s. In 1982, I remember him talking at the London School of Economics about this and raising concerns about the pressures. And we're throwing more and more of our resources, he says, into financial activities remote from the production of goods and services, into activities that generate high private rewards disproportionate to their social productivity. We heard this again from Lord Turner just a couple of years ago when he talked about socially useless transactions, and an industry that by and large is socially useless. And that is by and large the state of the City of London is by and large socially useless. And then you have this Bank for International Settlements. Now, oddly enough, the Bank for International Settlements have a good track record in recent years in that they predicted the collapse of the financial sector way ahead of any of the rest, and talked about this extraordinary waste of human capital, and Britain kind of leads the way here, where our best researchers are taken out of useful research into new areas of science and whatever, and attracted into the City of London, where they become hedgies or whatever it is they do. We, in Britain, have become, I think, what development economists call path dependent. We are now so tied into our role as an offshore financial centre. We have so de-skilled our manufacturing sectors, our research and development sectors, our universities, all of those things that lead to long-term growth of a productive economy have long since gone. We gave up, we surrendered to Korea and Japan and China and other countries decades ago. We are now totally dependent on financial services, and therefore we're held hostage to them. Because they say to us, and you hear it all the time on the Today programme, if you try to tax us, we'll leave. We'll go to Zurich. Yeah, that's exactly what Martin Wolf said. Yeah, well, when Martin Sorrell the leader, the chief executive of WPP, ahead of the last election, said, if you hold the 50% tax rate in place, I'll go to Dublin. We sent a limousine round to take him to the airport. Sod off! Just go! Because actually your contribution to the economy is next to zilch. And your contribution to our society is negative. It really is, for all the reasons that Richard talked about, it is deeply, deeply harmful to have this elite who see themselves as separate from the rest of us, who get separate regulatory treatment, who get separate tax treatment, who by and large don't contribute taxes to this country, and yet they have representation without taxation. Our democracy has been completely eroded by that, and that is the importance of the finance curse, because it's the political impacts that I think that are worst. And you'll know what I'm talking about when you visit hydrocarbon economies like Libya, where I used to work, and Algeria, where I used to work, and you discover, how completely detached the political processes are from the lives of ordinary citizens, where the politicians pay virtually no attention whatsoever to the well-being of their societies. I used to think it was bad in Algeria, but it's exactly the same in Britain. Our politicians are detached from our welfare. So I'm going to wrap up now and talk a bit about some of the discussion points that arise from this. Go to the next slide, please. Again, from the BIS. Again, I think this underlines our analysis of the finance curse. Come the financial booms, the boom that began, there were two booms, one the so-called dot-com boom, and the following one in the last decade, the housing-based booms. What we saw was that the crowding out by these booms of all thinking about what development strategy should we be pursuing, should we be investing in research and development, should we be trying to maintain a productive economy, or whatever. All of that went out the window. New Labour said, we don't need to worry about all that stuff because we'll financially engineer our way through debt and others and get the City of London to grow so fast that we can all live on paper money and tax returns from the City of London. And that's where our tax haven strategy, development strategy, has kicked back at us. We no longer have a productive economy by and large. We have an economy which is not only predatory on the rest of the world, where we in Britain are sucking capital out, financial capital, out of the rest of the world and human capital from the rest of the world. Which gets back to Linda's point. It does, because what we're seeking from India is not the unskilled labour, we're seeking the skilled labour, because the City of London wants to have a constant flow of low-cost skilled labour into Britain because they understand the demographics of the next 30 years.
Yeah, but India's not objecting.
Yeah, India's not objecting, but they got a massive surplus to export.